Teachers of Reddit, what generation did you like teaching most? 80s, 90s, why? University professor here. When I started teaching in the early students still got even my most obscure Simpsons and 80s film references. By the late I had nothing left to reference. By the early 2010s my kid had reached adolescence, so I had new material, but it really wasn't mine, and the culture had splintered so much that my Rick and Morty references only hit about 30% of the class. Lately I just stopped trying, and became that old, out-of-touch professor. I lived long enough to become the villain. 97 sarcastic, grungy, smoking more cigarettes, more clique y and edgy. 07 petty, attention-starved, overwhelmed, but much nicer. 17 under so many layers of irony and memes they don't even know who they are anymore or care. There's no point in being creative or devolving a personality, anything you could think of has already been done. My mom has been teaching for about 25 years. She says students haven't changed. Parents have. I'm still a new teacher, but what I've really enjoyed so far is using slang around students. Saying yeet gets a completely different reaction from 10th graders eye rolls and 5th graders glee, and I love either one. I'm not a teacher, but both my mother and sister are. They stated two big differences. 1. Social media changed how kids behave. A lot. Way more bullying is done online now and less of it is physically violent. 2. Certain trends don't really exist anymore. The punk, emo stuff from the 2000s isn't present today, but there is a stronger group of gamer, internet kids that play Fortnite and use TikTok. Also, there are way more outspokenly gay students. Started teaching in 1985, retired in 2015. I enjoyed teaching in all of those years and enjoyed knowing almost all of my students. I feel that any observations I might make would be so prejudiced by my own reactions to the era and my own aging that it's a bit of a ridiculous question. I do think that more people need to commit to better parenting, as I was appalled by how scarred many students were by sheer parental neglect and abuse, regardless of the era. I don't think abuse has become any more prolific, but I recognized it more and more as I became a veteran teacher. Other than that, talking about people by generations is just another way to divide us and keep us quarreling, otherwise we might notice that we've all become the property of corporations. And they don't want that. Devices and helicopter parenting, which doesn't mean parents who are intensely concerned about their children's futures, but parents who never leave their damn kids alone. My girlfriend's mom is a middle school teacher and she mentioned that kids are way more compassionate today, but they drastically lack social skills. Started teaching at university in the kids were really cliquey into what subculture or tribe they were in and didn't mix and intolerant of difference of any kind. Was 10 years older than them, most had no idea how to save a file on the computer into different formats. Had to tell kids not to describe things they didn't like a gay all the time. 10s they started being better at technology, but worse at fixing it when it went wrong, getting more tolerant, more likely to mix. 20s kids are really tolerant, kinder, but much, much sadder. In my mind kids have always been good at heart, but society and their upbringing is what ultimately shapes or corrupts them. Unfortunately, I think more kids nowadays have mental health issues since they unconsciously compare themselves to their peers. The difference is 20+ years ago kids only compared themselves to the few hundred kids in their school. Nowadays, they are comparing themselves to the millions of kids they see online. So I taught high school the last 2 years and I loved those kids. They're politically aware and smart. Oddly, they can't type to save their lives, but they at least grasp the world around them in a way that I certainly didn't at their age. I now teach middle school and holy crap. These kids are freaking nerds. I love them. They're all giant anime nerds. Like, what happened? I got beaten up at their age for liking DBZ and now I have to deal with them changing their names to Uchiha and Sasuke half the time. Jesus, I've only taught in the 10s. How long do teachers live for? I'll be surprised to make it to next year. The students of the 70s because they shared their drugs and were open to sex. My mom was a college teacher, and she was considered to be relatively cool. She will be 100 in July and is attached to her iMac, iPad and iPhone. Talk about seeing things change. I have taught emotionally disturbed children for much of my career. The kids I had 25 years ago would constantly fight with each other. The kids I had most recently made a habit of going after me and the parents always wanted to know what I did to provoke them. Give me my mid-1990s kids any day. They loved me as their teacher and didn't tolerate any disrespect towards me from their peers. My mother taught 6-year-olds in the 60s, 80s and 90s. The kids didn't change much, but the paperwork, administration and social work got too much for her at the end. Kids coming to school not being fed, reeking of smoke and pot. And parents went from being allies to some becoming outright hostile for their kids being given the slightest reprimand like, "Jayden, you didn't help tidy up so you'll need to wait for the other children to go play before you can go." Oh, and names. Not cultural, but badly spelled and weird names like "Hasta la vista" and "Fort Escort." She still loves running into her old kids, many of whom had children she taught, and some are now grandparents. Repost this when it's not the middle of a Monday in America for more answers. They're probably busy teaching. Not a teacher and not on point but interesting to me. My wife teaches graphic design, which has become nearly completely a digital pursuit over the past 25 years. She has remarked that 10 years ago her students would instantly catch on and often be teaching her things about how the fairly specialized data hog software she uses in class works, keyboard shortcuts, architecture understanding. In the past couple of years she increasingly sees students who have near zero computer experience and are afraid of having to learn, use software. She has come to realize there are many students whose computer experience is using their phone for social media. I like them all. But my favorite thing about this generation is that they are in general more respectful, polite and empathic. A newish teacher think anything before the 90s was less detrimental to teachers. I teach now, and there is virtually no student or parent accountability. Many, not all, but many, expect the school system to raise their children for them these days. Not sure where society went wrong. I can't comment as a teacher, but as someone in educational IT, everything today is about how can we buy this latest pointless web app for kids to use and shoehorn it in ASAP. I taught in the late 70s, early 80s in northern Alberta. The nice part about being that early in my career, plus in northern Alberta, was that you could pretty much do whatever you wanted. My kids found an injured duck on the playground and we brought it into the classroom and spent weeks nursing that duck back to health. As the duck grew stronger, he would do these practice flights in our classroom to the point where he would do a couple of laps around the room and my kids wouldn't even get excited about it. Later in that same year we grew hydroponic tomato plants that went from floor to ceiling and were able to harvest tomatoes in the middle of winter. Man, that was a great year. Pretty sure you couldn't do most of that in a grade 1 classroom these days. I am not a teacher, but I know some older grade school teachers who said they enjoyed teaching much more before standardized testing became a thing in our state. Now they have less flexibility and creativity and have to teach just to a test at the end of the year. Started teaching first grade in 1999. I loved teaching till about 2006. Students were so eager to learn kept me on my toes. They were respectful and the parents were supportive. Little by little things started changing. Complaining about colors of napkins, words like angels, witch. It kept getting worse. The amount of paperwork and meetings, no time to teach. The testing got in the way, took time away from teaching and what was important, which is the children. Little by little it took most of my energy. Stopped teaching after only 13 years. I've only been teaching high school for 11 years, but there's a huge difference between kids these days and kids back then. Kids back then were more insecure and couldn't handle technology. In a class of 21 I had 17 that couldn't put their phones down for 2 seconds. We had to institute a policy that involved taking away their phones for the duration of the class, and they threw a fit. Nowadays, kids are more aware and alert about treating people nicely and doing the right thing. Phones are only a problem for maybe 2-3 of that same group of kids. They are a lot nicer and more respectful. I love this current generation. I like the kids I teach now. They are, for the most part, really peaceful. We have so few fights on campus. They are really accepting. LGBTQ folks would have been beaten when I was a kid, now it's no factor. General apathy and major boredom rule the campus, but my kids still get up to fun. If I had to guess, the 80s. When a $50,000 paycheck meant you were making the big monies. Edit, teachers made closer less to $20,000 a year in the 80s. What the fuck? This is my first academic year and I can already tell you it's my least favorite of my entire career. Times have definitely gotten tougher on kids. I don't even know where to start. The current generation are the worst. The Zoomers now love luxury, they have bad manners, contempt for authority, they show disrespect for elders and love chatter in place of exercise. The Zoomers are now tyrants, not the servants of their households. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents, chatter before company, gobble up dainties at the table, cross their legs, and tyrannize their teachers. My buddy is a college professor for over 25 years, he says the college kids now want everything handed to them. Kids don't change, but accountability is gone in my district. First half of my career 90s, students and parents were far more accountable. Today, if a student does not thrive, it is blame the teacher all day, every day. Teachers now compete with TikTok, Snapchat, video games etc. And there is such a sense of entitlement, at least in my district. The students are still great, but the adults have messed this up so bad. We have eliminated all deadlines in my district, and students can redo an assignment over and over until they get the grade they want. Consequences can be great learning experiences, but we are no longer able to apply them. Started off as a middle, high school teacher in the 80s and currently a university graduate school professor. I've dealt with each generation. Loved my young mindfuls of mush back in the 80s. They were fun, irreverent, inquisitive and happy-go-lucky. All I had to do was whip them into shape and I had a huge toolbox of tools, humor, sarcasm, life observations, etc., with which I could amuse, challenge, distract and motivate them. Not today. Everyone is looking to be offended. Students secretly video and record you to catch you doing something that they can bludgeon you out of your career over. The attitude of entitlement, judgmentalism that they would deny and the absence of appreciation for attempts at humor make teaching miserable where it used to be enjoyable. Started teaching in 2002. All of that has been middle school. Grades 6–8 ages 11–14. Biggest changes have been prevalence and reliance on screens and devices, but ultimately what kids want is acceptance. And most of them will seek it wherever it can be found easily, which is on a screen. All I can really say is that I am incredibly grateful that Facebook and social media did not exist when I was a kid, teenager. Hell, in college all we had was AIM, ICQ, and LiveJournal. I'm a philosophy professor and the only thing I've noticed is that the latest generation of students Zoomers, are really bad at writing. Obscenely. Every other generation I've taught has been roughly the same, with different philosophical predilections, but for some reason everyone's just really bad at writing now, let alone philosophy. As a former teacher, my favorites were always the elementary students. I never really had them but I subbed elementary classes now and then. The elementary kids were so darn cute and eager to please. Oh heck, I'm so old I remember Who Shot Jr. And I also remember when all Amazon had to offer were books. Paper books. I've tried to keep up with some current social elements and I do stream Netflix and Amazon Prime and lately even YouTube videos, so I feel like I'm sort of informed and connected to a core cultural structure. But the vast number of options for entertaining, informing, or just distracting has definitely changed the generational dynamics. There's not just a generation gap, there's a canyon, with all kinds of side canyons and various rivulets. The information flows everywhere. Teaching in university has been interested. On one hand, I enjoyed the 90s because there was still not a ton of technology. Sure, there was more manual work but I enjoyed it. As for students, one of the things I've noticed is that my cultural references have absolutely tanked. I was teaching a Philosophy Ethics 100 course and literally no one got my reference to The Matrix or Pulp Fiction or anything. It was the first time I felt that internal twinge of being out of date and realizing I was teaching 17–18-year-olds who were being born when that movie came out. I still love the job though. Old as fuck teachers of Reddit. Ask when school isn't in session. I like teaching now because we have a lot of technology that makes things easier. No more grading tests by hand, or standing in line to run scantrons. Pretty sweet. My dad's a retired teacher. He taught in a slummy area and saw and knew some crap. First day of school he used to tell his kids, "You will be safe in this classroom." When a young female student of his was hospitalized after a suicide attempt she asked to see my dad. He brought her a teddy bear. He was so great with the kids and they always put him with IEP kids before it was called that. Years later he was eating breakfast at his favorite diner and went to pay. The waitress said, "Oh no, the gentleman at the table over there has paid for your meal." It was a former student. I'm not a teacher, but my graduating class was 00. The entire school district hated our class. We were deemed the bad class right off. There was lots of homecoming activities with the previous classes, but when we came up, they took away all of the skits and hall decorating for homecoming week and moved the hall decorating to one tiny spot in the gym. When it came to our senior year, no senior skip day cause if you get caught you won't be allowed to graduate. A lot of people in my class said, "Screw you," and skipped anyway. There was no way that they were going to let half of our class, 20 people that skipped, not graduate. So they ignored their little rule. Not a teacher. But when I was a kid in the 90s, I really enjoyed the classroom aspect of school. Same for the early 2000s, but of course elementary was more nostalgic. However, in 2010 when I observed a semester in a high school for possibly becoming a teacher, it really left a bad impression. I observed in the classroom of teachers I myself had when I was in high school, but the students were a hell. Also, having much younger siblings, seeing how things were going in their school. And #X200B. Teachers have it hard now, parents give them hell, the students aren't any better. It's a very bad time to be a teacher, not just because of COVID. I'm a newer teacher, but what I love about the current generation elementary is the lack of bullying. One kid tried to make fun of a boy for having a pink lunchbox and the whole class got mad at the bully. Color doesn't have gender, Connor. Why are you making fun of him? I had a kid who is transgender, came out at the beginning of the year, changed names multiple times, was just still trying to figure out identity, and that kid did not get made fun of once. Every single kids used the preferred pronouns and names. The classmates would get upset when a teacher or sub didn't and corrected them for the student since he was too shy to say anything himself. Honestly, they are the kindest and most tolerant generation I've ever seen. I'm a middle school teacher and I am constantly very aware of my knowledge and actions overstepping the cool line, and being cringe. I've been teaching for 28 years. From elementary to high school. I'll take the children if the 90s because cell phones didn't distract the students and most parents didn't try to blame the teachers on the failures of their child. I was a teacher during the 90s and it was definitely better in the 90s. The 90s kids weren't fussing about that new invention, the automobile, like the kids were, and they weren't all gossiping about American imperialism. Gotta say, teaching in the 1890s was a hell of an experience. Before smartphones, the math teachers loved saying, "Well, you won't have a calculator at all times with you in the real world." Any teachers here that lived to eat those words? My dad was a teacher for over 40 years, beginning in 1970 and fully retiring around 2013. Most of the memorable times he talks about come from the 70s. His students then were more open to discussion of ideas, philosophy, literature. My dad's roommate was another teacher at the school, and groups of students would just show up at their house to hang out, listen to music, and continue their discussions. That's something that would never happen today.